Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Penny and this is Little by Little. In our last few videos, we've been working on the furniture inside of our homestead kitchen. And today we're going to build the last of the 4 large pieces. Of the 4 larger pieces in the kitchen, I was able to find 2 of them. The kitchen table I found in a museum, and the stove I found actually in the boneyard of the land that the house sat on. The refrigerator, however, I was not able to find. And while I remember that there was a fridge, I don't remember a lot of details about it. I do think that it was white, and I'm pretty sure it was one solid door with the freezer compartment inside. But that's all I really remember. So I went hunting online for an older vintage 1950s kind of fridge that I thought might work. And when I saw the picture of this one, it really kind of stood out to me as like, yeah, that could be it. It's probably not the exact same fridge, but I think it's close enough, at least from my memory. So in today's video, we're going to be building this vintage Westinghouse refrigerator. Now the refrigerator does have a working door, we have a crisper, and a freezer section. So if you're interested in following along, I invite you to do so. Let's get started. As always, let's have a look at the different materials and tools that you'll need for this project. The majority of the fridge is made out of this 1/4-inch foam board that I buy at the dollar store. I believe it comes in a sheet of about 24 inches by 30 inches, and I think I paid $1.50 for it. You'll need a couple of different pieces of craft wood. This one is 3/32 of an inch, or 2.5 millimeters. And this one is 1/32 of an inch, or 1.5 millimeters thickness. You'll need a couple of small pieces of plastic canvas. This can be found in any craft store, but you can also get it at the dollar store. You'll need a very small strip of some white fabric. Now, I've used interfacing simply because that's what I had on hand, but any kind of white cotton will work just fine. I would stay away from t-shirt material because I find that t-shirt material has too much stretch, and it's also a little bit too thick for what we need. I also have here a couple of different types of metallic sticker. So this one is just a permanent vinyl. You can buy it in the craft store either by the roll, or you can buy typically 12 by 12 sheets of different colors of this permanent vinyl. So this is just from a 12 by 12 sheet. This one I actually bought online on Amazon about a year ago. I was making some stainless steel furniture, and so I picked this up. It's also got the adhesive back. You just peel off the paper from the back. Either one of those will work. If you don't have this, which probably a lot of people don't, I would stick with the vinyl myself. I've also got some craft matchsticks. You'll need 4 for sure, but I've got 6 out in case I break one. A couple of fun things in this project. I have this single serving condiment package, which we'll be using as a crisper. And then I have this pen, which I wasn't actually after the pen, it was after the metal clip on the pen, because those make great handles for these old vintage fridges. I also have some drywall compound, which I just used to fill in some of the edges just to smooth things out a little bit. And moving on now to our tools. I have my ruler, a nice sharp pencil, my craft knife. These are setup blocks, which I use quite frequently in my projects. If you've been following my videos, you'll see that I use them quite a bit. They're not a requirement, but they sure are nice to have. I have also a couple of different types of sandpaper. I have a medium grade sandpaper, which I think is about a 120. And I also have this fine grain sandpaper, which is, I believe, about a 400. If you have a sanding block, it'll make your life easier. If you don't, the sandpaper will work just fine. For my glue, I'm going to be using just some white tacky glue, but I'm also going to be using some super glue. And now this is Gorilla brand, but any super glue will work. For paint, I have my white paint, I have a gray paint, and then I also have this silver metallic paint. And then for the overall glossy finish on the fridge, I've used this glossy podge as a final coat. I'm also going to be using these little tiny magnets. These are about 3 millimeters in diameter and about 1 millimeter thick, and you'll need 10 of those. So that's it for our materials. I'm excited to get started. So without further ado, let's do that. We'll start by building the box for the fridge. So you can take out your pieces A, B, and C. I'm going to put one of the A pieces aside. This will be the door of the fridge, and we're not going to work on that until a little bit later. So you'll have your back piece, your two side pieces, your top and your bottom. Now before we get started gluing it all together, we do want to mark out some measurements for the shelves and for the freezer section. So as you can see, I have drawn out and made a pencil mark for those measurements. Back piece, what we're going to do is starting from the top, and I'm using millimeters, you're going to draw a line at 35 millimeters, 55 millimeters, and 80 millimeters. Then on the two sides, you're going to mark similar measurements, but we're going to start a little bit farther down because we have to make allowances for the top of the fridge. And so the lines on your sides will be at 30 millimeters, 50 millimeters, and 75 millimeters. And once you've drawn those across, when you set it together, your lines should line up evenly. And that'll give you a good guide for when you're putting in your shelves. So I have also gone ahead and I have drawn on the top of our back piece. You can see where I've rounded off the corners. These older vintage fridges were not typically square like the modern day ones are. And so I'm going to actually use my X-Acto knife and I'm going to cut those pieces off as round as I can. And it's okay if it's not completely straight. You're going to use some sandpaper to take off all of the rough edges, but we'll just take off the majority of it with the X-Acto knife. And then I'll take my medium grade sandpaper and I'm just going to use it just to go over and round the edges off. We're also going to do a little bit of work on the top piece so that when the top goes on, it matches that roundness. And so what I'm going to do then is I'm just going to cut these pieces on like just like a little triangle out of each one. So I've marked kind of where it meets the top of the back of the door, and I'm going to go out this way and kind of cut it at about a 45-degree angle on both sides. And again, if it's not perfectly straight, that's okay. The sandpaper will do the rest of the job for you. So let's glue it all together. I'm just going to be using some regular tacky glue, and we'll start with the top piece. If you've been following along on my videos, you'll know how often I use these little setup blocks, and they are perfectly square. So you can always trust that if you're leaning your project against it and all the pieces are pushed up against it, that you're going to have a perfect 90-degree angle. We'll apply our side pieces next. Make sure you're pushing that side piece up nice and tight to the top piece. And then our other side. I use a fair bit of glue on foam because it tends to soak into the foam. And now our bottom piece. And you don't have to do any kind of shaving or shaping on that bottom piece. It should remain perfectly square. And that box will be the beginning of our fridge. I'm going to go over now and just sand off and round off the top piece. So just use my sandpaper and just take off those rough edges. I'm going to take the compound now and just fill in all of the cracks on the piece. Now this is a nice soft compound and it's very easy to manipulate it with your fingertips. So I just put on a thin layer. And then I'm also going to put a layer on where we rounded off the piece with the sandpaper. So on all of these curved edges, as well as all of the cracks that you can see in the foam board. Now each layer of this compound takes about 24 hours to dry. And you should wait until it's completely dry before you try sanding it. And in all likelihood, I'm going to have to do 2 coats of this in order to get the finish that I'm looking for. I've put 2 layers of the drywall compound on there, and now I'm just going to go over it with a very fine sandpaper to try and get the smoothest finish I can now. I feel like I've gotten that nice rounded edge that I was looking for there. Now it certainly is a little bit off color where the drywall dried because the drywall is slightly different shade of white, but that's okay because I was going to paint it anyway, so you shouldn't be able to see a lot of that drywall once the painting is done. But I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to finish sanding it down to get it as smooth as possible, and then we'll move on. I've cut out these little pieces from some plastic canvas, and I'm going to fashion these into the racks that will go into the fridge. So I'm going to have 2 racks. We'll have a crisper down here. We'll have a rack here and a rack here. So I'm going to put my fridge aside for now, and we'll work on these pieces. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out some pieces so that this looks like just the bars going across rather than the crisscross. So just taking my X-Acto knife, so I'm going to put something under there just to make it easier to see. So just taking my X-Acto knife, I'm going to run, and this is very easy to cut. I'm just going to run my knife and cut out on either side of the length of that. And then I'll do the same on this side. And if I continue to do that all the way across, then it'll look like just the bars going from the front to the back. And make sure you leave the outside frame intact. So you don't want to go all the way through the front and the back piece. So now you can see I just have the straight lines. I don't have the crossways going around. And the next thing I want to do then is now paint that with a silver metallic paint so that it looks like a chrome rack for the fridge. I find when I'm painting with metallic paints that it's very see-through and it takes multiple coats to cover so that you can't see what's underneath. So oftentimes what I'll do is I will paint it with a gray first underneath, and then paint the metallic paint on top of that, and I find that works better. So that's what I'm going to try first. So I have just this Art Deco Americana. It is a neutral gray color, and it's just acrylic paint, and we're going to put a layer of that on first. That, I think, picks up the paint pretty well. The nice thing about acrylic paint is how fast it dries. So by the time I finish painting the side of the second piece, the first piece is ready for another coat. So things go really quickly. Next, I'm going to add a layer of this silver metallic paint. Now, I think you can probably see that. It does have now more of a shiny metallic look to it. It's not exactly chrome, but I think it's close enough. I'm going to give the same paint treatment to these little matchsticks, and that's what's going to hold those racks in place inside the fridge. So we'll start with the plain gray, and then once that's on, then we'll put the metallic paint on there as well. We're going to take these matchsticks and we're going to glue them in, and we'll glue it into place. Then we can go ahead and just glue in those racks so that they sit on top of those matchsticks. We'll work next on the freezer door. So you will need pieces F, G, and H for that. Now F will be your bottom of your freezer, and G will be the door of the freezer, and H will be the latch that will hold the door closed. Now you can see that I have glued to the middle of H and the middle of G these tiny little magnets. These are little 3mm magnets. I always, when I'm putting magnets on, will use super glue. So I use this Gorilla super glue, but any super glue will do. I just find that tacky glue or wood glue isn't a strong enough hold. Those magnets tend to pull each other off if they're not used with super glue. So that's what I use. So this little piece is going to be attached up in the top of this freezer, but it'll sit up on the top of the freezer up here. And then this piece, this door, is going to be attached to the front of the shelf, and when it's closed, this magnet and this magnet will hold it closed. So before we put that in, I do want to cover these two pieces. Now there's really no way that I can think of anyway to put a hinge on this thin of a wood. So what I've decided to do instead is to use some call it Matchsticks, some call it shelf liner. I have this shelf liner. If you don't have that, I mean, I bought this because at the time I was doing some stainless steel appliances, but you can buy other types of white or even a marbly kind of a shelf liner at the dollar store, and that will work just as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the backing. I'm going to put my shelf piece up near the top, and I'll trim the edges off when I'm finished, but I'll put this up here. And then this piece, which is your door, is going to sit in front of the ledge. So I'm going to put that here. And then, so I've got the right distance there. Then I'll apply that underneath. Then I'll fold that up, and then you'll see that that will hold the door. And of course our magnet is going to be facing outwards. And then I'm going to go ahead and glue in the shelf. And of course I'll have to put a handle here so you can open it. We're going to work on the fridge door next, and it's important that the fridge door be the same shape as the fridge, of course. So I'm just going to lay this piece on top. I'll make sure that it's flush all the way around, particularly on the top. So you can see where the fridge itself is curved, but the door is not. So I just want to take my pencil and create a line there so that I know where to shave off those corners. And we don't have to do that on the bottom because the bottom is square. So we'll put the fridge aside for now. And I'm just going to take my X-Acto knife and cut those corners off. And the rest of that shaping I'll just do with sandpaper. I considered trying to put a hinge on this door so that it would open, but honestly, with foam board, it's almost impossible. A nail just simply won't stay in that foam. So I've decided to use magnets instead. So basically, if you want to open the fridge, the door is just going to pop off like that. So I'm going to go ahead and put some magnets in. So I'll mark off on both sides where the magnets are going to be. So I'm just going to take a pencil and I'm going to put it down about 30 millimeters for the first one from the top. Put a little pencil mark on both sides. Actually, I'll put the second one about 40 millimeters from the bottom because I do want to leave room there for my crisper, and I'm not sure exactly how high that crisper is going to come up just yet. So 40 millimeters from the bottom and 30 millimeters from the top. So we're going to put a magnet here.
Grilled cheese is ready, Ma.
Here, here, and here. And then we're also going to put magnets on this side at the same distance. Using our super glue again, just going to fill those holes one at a time and pop the magnets in. I always use a toothpick to push that in because we don't want that super glue to get stuck on our fingers. We'll mark in our door just a little center dot there that lines up with the line that we drew. Now on this one, we're going to actually have to cut through that paper, so it's not quite as easy as just pushing it into the foam like it is on the fridge. So I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and I'm going to attempt to cut the tiniest little circle around those dots just to get rid of the top layer of paper. I'm just going to do that all the way around. So now we have our magnets in the fridge, and we have corresponding magnets in the door. And when I turn that over, it's just going to snap right on top. And one last step for these magnets. The foam board is not strong enough to hold these magnets in all on their own, even with the super glue. So what I always do with magnets is I always cover them with a thin piece of paper. So this is just ordinary copy paper, and I'm just going to take a little strip of that paper and just lay it over top of the magnet. And then what that will do is it will stop the force of the other magnet from pulling these magnets out of the foam. And so I'm going to do that to all four. I try not to put glue right directly on the magnet, but just to the top and bottom of it. And I place my paper over top. And you can see that I've done that to the fridge as well. I've just put my extra piece of paper over top of those magnets as well. Now that the magnets are in there, it just sticks on like that. I'm going to take my sanding block and just kind of soften up those edges so that they're not quite so sharp. I do want them to have a little bit of a rounded edge to them. I'll take my fine grained sandpaper and go over that as well, just to get rid of any of the little hairs of paper there. There we are. So next we're going to work on the crisper on the inside. We're going to move on now to the bottom crisper. I'm going to take piece I, which is the shelf above the crisper, and I'm going to cover that in the same shelf liner that I did for the freezer door. My intention originally was going to be to build a crisper out of pieces of wood and clear plastic. But then I had this great idea of using a container that something like a jam or peanut butter. I'm going to just test again to make sure that my crisper slides in and out well. That's great. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put some handles on our freezer door and on our crisper. And what I've done is I've just taken a matchstick, a craft matchstick, and I've just cut off about 3/8 of an inch maybe. And I've painted them first gray, and then I went over it with the metallic silver paint as well. And I only painted those on 3 sides. And I'm going to use a pair of tweezers this time. I'm actually going to glue that to the underside of that lip. So you can get behind there and pull it. Okay, next thing we need to do is we need to paint it. Because that drywall compound was a slightly different shade of white, and I'd like it to be all kind of one color. So I am going to go ahead and paint it. I think what I'm going to do though is I'm going to put a coat of Podge on there first. Although I think typically when things are put together and already glued together, the warping isn't as big a factor as if it was just a straight piece of the foam board. But I never like to take any chances or unnecessary chances, so I'm going to go ahead and put that Podge on there first, and then we'll paint over it with the white. To make sure my brush is nice and dry as well. And I'm not going to put a lot on there, just one layer, because the less amount of moisture, the better. The podge is, of course, going to dry clear. It's also going to seal all of that drywall compound as well, so that it's not, sometimes it can be dusty. I'm also going to podge the front of our fridge door as well. We're going to go ahead and paint it now. Again, nice even strokes, not too much paint on your brush. Just a nice even coat. I did in fact do 2 coats, and I think it covered really well. I'm going to add one last layer of this podge, and this time I'm going to use the gloss because I'm hoping that it'll have a little bit of a shine to it when I'm done. We're going to install the handle next. So as I said earlier in the video, I did take this off of a pen. It was the smallest one that I could find, and I think it'll work really well for the handle. So as you can see, it does have this slightly longer piece here in the middle. And so what I ended up doing was I cut 2 small slits in the door itself so that those 2 longer pieces could sit down into the door. And so you'll see here those 2 slits. And so I'm going to put some crazy glue on here. I'm going to put it on those 2 pieces that'll go into the actual foam board, and then around this piece at the top here. And then we'll just slide it into the door. So I think that'll actually work really well. It actually kind of looks like a fridge handle, doesn't it? The photo that I am using as a reference for this fridge is an old Westinghouse fridge. And Westinghouse always had its name across the front of the fridge. And they did it in, of course, these metal raised letters, which I'm not able to duplicate. But I did print out on my Cricut from some metallic vinyl the name Westinghouse, and because I put that podge coating on here, I think that's going to stick to it quite well. Now if you don't have a Cricut and you don't have the ability to cut those out, if you've got a good steady hand, you can use like a metallic fine tip marker and write it on there, or you can just leave it off altogether. But I do have the access to that cutting system, and so I'm going to take advantage. And we'll place them on the top of the handle, or just above the handle. Right about there. Just going to use my little bone folder there just to rub it. And there we go. I do have a little base to put on the bottom. That's marked piece D on your instructions. And I'm just going to glue that to the bottom just so that it sits up just a little bit off of the floor. So we'll sit flush with the front. I'll take the door off for a second. It'll sit flush with the front, and I am going to leave a little bit of a space in the back because I am going to be putting baseboards onto the wall where that fridge is going to sit, and I want that baseboard to sit down underneath so that the fridge can actually sit flush against the wall. So we're just going to do that with some tacky glue. And I'll use a little toothpick to spread that around. After I thought I was done with the fridge, I took it up to show my husband, and I was showing him the magnet system that I used for the fridge. And I was telling him how I would like to have been able to put a hinge on it, but unfortunately with foam board, it's incredibly difficult. And he came up with this great idea of using a piece of fabric as a hinge. So I'll show you what I did. I took this very small piece of white cotton fabric, and this is about 10 to 12 millimeters wide and about 125 millimeters long. And just using some regular tacky glue, I glued it first to the inside edge of the fridge door, and then once it had dried, glued the other half onto the frame of the fridge. And I'm telling you, now that it's dry, I'm so pleased with it because it's very sturdy. It's not going to pull apart. It still has that snap from the magnets, but you can also open the door as well. So that's what we have done for the fridge. I hope you've enjoyed this video. This one was a lot of fun for me. It was very much outside of my wheelhouse. I've never done any kind of vintage appliance before, so this one was a lot of fun. I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel, and on our next video we'll be starting a brand new project, so I hope to see you then, and until then, happy crafting.